According to data compiled by the US Geological Survey, the United States is fully dependent on foreign suppliers for more than a dozen critical minerals and heavily dependent for dozens more. These materials are not obscure. They sit at the core of electric vehicle batteries, semiconductor fabrication, satellite systems, and advanced weapons platforms. What makes this dependence unusual is not that it exists, but that it has persisted through a decade of deliberate policy effort designed to eliminate it. Since the late 2010s, successive US administrations have spent billions of dollars trying to reassert control over these supply chains. New funding authorities were activated. Industrial policy returned to Washington after decades of absence. Strategic language once reserved for oil and defense entered conversations about lithium, cobalt, and rare earth elements. And yet, despite this surge of attention and money, America's exposure to external mineral supply shocks has not meaningfully disappeared. The contradiction raises a deeper question. How can a country mobilize such financial and institutional force and still find itself constrained? The answer is not found in political will or budget size. It lies in the quiet mechanics of how industrial power accumulates, hardens, and then resists disruption. To understand this, it helps to follow one concrete example. Not a politician, but an institution most Americans have never heard of. The Export-Import Bank of the United States was created to support American exporters. For decades, it operated on the margins of economic policy. But beginning in the Trump era, its mandate subtly shifted. It was no longer just backing aircraft sales or infrastructure projects overseas. It was being repositioned as a strategic instrument. That shift became visible with an initiative known as Project Volt, structured as a public-private partnership and anchored by a proposed $10 billion loan. Project Volt was designed to create a commercial reserve of critical minerals. The logic was straightforward. Instead of waiting for supply disruptions to cascade through markets, the United States would pre-position materials essential to its manufacturers. Price volatility could be smoothed, supply shocks could be absorbed, domestic industry would gain breathing room. On paper, it looked like a decisive move. In reality, it exposed a much older and deeper constraint. Critical minerals supply chains are often described as pipelines. But a better metaphor is a circulatory system. Mines are the heart, factories are the organs. But between them lie narrow arteries where raw material is transformed, purified, standardized, and priced. These arteries are the midstream, and over the last 30 years, control over this midstream quietly consolidated. This is what might be called the refinement lock-in strategy. It does not begin with dominance. It begins with accumulation. In the 1980s and 1990s, China identified minerals processing as an industrial opportunity few others wanted. Mining was environmentally costly. Refining was chemically complex. Profit margins were thin. Western firms, operating under stricter regulations and higher labor costs, gradually exited. Chinese firms entered, not because demand was explosive, but because no one else was willing to absorb the friction. Over time, processing capacity expanded, technical expertise clustered, environmental externalities were localized. According to World Bank and IMF analyses, by the early 2000s, China had become the central node for refining rare earth oxides and battery-grade materials. Mining still occurred across the globe, but refinement flowed through a single industrial geography. This is where accumulation turned into entrenchment. Once refinement capacity scales, it does more than process material. It sets standards. Purity grades, delivery schedules, contract norms. Downstream manufacturers begin designing products around those specifications. Supply chains optimize themselves for reliability, not ideology. According to industry data cited by RAND, qualifying a new materials supplier for high-precision manufacturing can take years. Switching costs rise, optionality shrinks. By the time policymakers recognize dependence, the system is no longer neutral. It has memory. This is where leverage emerges. Leverage does not require coercion. It does not require export bans or dramatic cutoffs. It operates through pricing power, contract renewal, and logistical preference. IMF commodity data shows that even minor disruptions or signals of constraint in mineral processing markets can generate disproportionate price swings. When price benchmarks are set in one country, volatility transmits outward. The 2010 rare earth export episode, often cited in policy circles, was less important for its duration than for its signal. It demonstrated that control of refinement translated into strategic influence without firing a shot. Manufacturers adjusted behavior, governments adjusted assumptions, the system learned. When the United States returned to industrial policy during the Trump administration, it did so inside this already learned system. Funding increased, domestic mining projects were supported, strategic stockpiles were discussed, the Defense Production Act was invoked. Project Vault represented an attempt to buy time within the existing architecture. But buying time is not the same as changing structure. This is where the refinement lock-in strategy reveals its second layer. Building a mine is difficult. Building a refinery is harder. According to US permitting data, bringing a new mining operation online can take a decade or more. Refining facilities face similar timelines, compounded by environmental review, waste handling, and community opposition. Capital costs are high. Returns are uncertain. Even with subsidies, US production costs remain higher than established incumbents, as noted in multiple Rand and Brookings assessments. Industrial funding can offset some of this. It cannot eliminate it. More importantly, global demand continues to rise. Electric vehicles, renewable energy systems, and advanced electronics increase consumption faster than new capacity comes online. In that environment, incumbents benefit first. According to IMF data, policy-driven demand surges often reward existing producers long before alternatives materialize. This creates a strategic irony. Efforts to reduce dependence can, in the short term, deepen it. By signaling long-term demand and committing public capital, governments raise the value of existing supply chains. Prices rise, contracts tighten, the center of gravity remains where it already is. Project Vault can smooth shocks, but it cannot relocate the artery itself. This pattern is not unique to minerals. Oil followed a similar trajectory in the 20th century. Control over refining and shipping mattered as much as wells. Strategic reserves provided buffers, not autonomy. Semiconductors tell a related story. Fabrication clusters where ecosystems already exist. Governments concede alternatives, but displacement takes decades. What connects these cases is not ideology. It is infrastructure inertia. Infrastructure embeds decisions. It encodes cost structures. It disciplines policy ambition. Over time, quiet consequences accumulate. Manufacturers design products around assured inputs. Defense planners assume availability rather than risk substitution. Trade policy narrows as retaliation costs rise. According to CFR analyses, economic statecraft becomes more constrained when dependencies run through industrial bottlenecks rather than consumer goods. These constraints rarely announce themselves. They appear as delays, exemptions, hedges, and compromises. Policy looks active. Structure remains intact. This is why the critical minerals challenge persists across administrations. Trump accelerated recognition. Subsequent governments expanded funding. The language hardened. But the underlying architecture changed slowly. The refinement lock-in strategy does not require conspiracy or coordination. It works because it aligns incentives over time. Each actor optimizes locally. The system optimizes globally. Once established, it resists reversal. The unresolved question is not whether the United States can spend more. It almost certainly will. According to congressional and IMF projections, public and private investment in critical minerals will continue to rise over the next decade. The question is whether capital can outrun time. Changing this system requires more than funding mines or building stockpiles. It requires rebuilding the midstream, refineries, chemical expertise, waste management infrastructure, pricing benchmarks, and long-term contracts. Each of these is slow. Each faces political, environmental, and economic resistance. And while this unfolds, demand continues to accelerate. This creates a subtle strategic tension. The more urgent the transition, the more leverage accrues to those who already control its bottlenecks. The faster the world moves, the harder it becomes to change direction. None of this implies inevitability. Systems do evolve, capacity does relocate, but evolution follows the logic of infrastructure, not election cycles. Over the next 5 to 10 years, the outcome is unlikely to be independence or dominance. It is more likely to be managed exposure, partial diversification, strategic buffers layered onto persistent reliance. Power in the modern economy rarely looks like conquest. It looks like standards, logistics, and contracts quietly shaping what is feasible. By the time dependence becomes visible, reacting to it often reinforces the very pathways it seeks to escape. That is the paradox at the center of America's critical minerals strategy, not a lack of effort, but the weight of accumulated structure. The system continues to move. And for now, it moves according to rules written long before the problem had a name.